Hello, in this video, I'm going to describe the way we prioritize evidence in vibrational astrology. So vibrational astrology is an evidence-based practice. One feature of evidence-based practices is that different kinds of evidence are prioritized. Some observations give us greater confidence in our ideas. So we have lots of ideas in astrology that planets and zodiac signs have a certain effect, and each planet does particular things. We have all these ideas. Now, how do we evaluate how true they are? Well, we have our evidence and we prioritize the evidence. The strongest evidence that something is true, like if we say that fixed signs are more stubborn, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius, and mutable signs are more flexible. How can we verify that that's true? The strongest way to confirm it is with a hypothesis test. And what you do in a hypothesis test is before you look at the charts of people. So you cannot use your existing clients. You cannot use famous people whose charts you've looked at. That would not be a strict hypothesis test. So the greatest evidence would be if you state your hypothesis clearly at the beginning, what it is, and conceptually what the concept is, and then how you are going to see that. So if I say I think fixed signs are more stubborn, and my hypothesis is that people who have the sun in a fixed sign will score higher on a psychological trait of stubbornness that's in some kind of psychological test. So perhaps there already is a psychological test. I don't know if there is, that measures things like how flexible versus how stubborn you are. If there is such a test, or if one can be constructed, you could give that test to people and see if it's true that the people who have sun in fixed signs have higher scores on being fixed. Now, to be a really good hypothesis test, the people who are being evaluated cannot have any hints or ideas about how the test is done. So if I know my sun sign, and most people do, and I know some of the ideas of that sun sign, and most people have at least a general idea, like they may know that their sun is in Gemini, and that supposedly makes them more flexible and adaptable. And even if they don't believe in astrology, they have this idea in their heads. It's possible. It's just possible, not definite, but possible, that knowing that would distort the results of the research. So you need to have a hypothesis, a way of evaluating the hypothesis where that way of evaluating it is not distorted by some a priori knowledge of the people who are being studied or any other what we call extraneous variable that can be interfering with a clear, you might say, objective observation of what's going on. The data must be new data that's obtained in a fair way. So, for example, if the data is obtained from clients that you already have, well, that's what we call convenience sampling. You've gotten the charts by what was convenient to get. That doesn't make your hypothesis test completely worthless, but it's not as pure. It's not done as well. So any kind of research varies in how excellent the research is. And sometimes we do research that's not optimum because that's all we have available. So we do the best with what we have. But a very strict hypothesis test where the people don't know ahead of time the astrology that's being used to determine things, and where the data is collected through what we call a random sample, or at least some existing database that you have not looked at already, that is the optimum way to do a hypothesis test. A well-conducted hypothesis test is the strongest indication that what you're saying is really true. An example of a hypothesis test in astrology that gave positive results is when we did the hypothesis test on bipolar disorder, which is explained in the last chapters of the book on bipolar disorder, the astrology of a bipolar disorder, a scientific breakthrough. That book describes it. So that's an example of it. Our second strongest evidence in vibrational astrology is a quantitative assessment of a model where there's no selection bias. So again, no selection bias or almost no selection bias is a case where you're looking at data in a database of, say, people who are artists or scientists or psychics or whatever it is you're studying, or people that have bipolar disorder, or people that have a physical illness like heart disease. So you're getting this data that in a way that's not under your control, and that you can be influencing what kind of charts you're analyzing very much. So if you have some data that does not have a lot of selection bias, meaning it's not cherry-picked, it's not data that you've chosen. Astrologers do this all the time. They say, look at all these people with heart disease, and they take some famous celebrities. Well, why did they pick those celebrities and not others? Could they have even unconsciously chosen celebrities that fit what they want? If you have some strict rules, for example, we've done research on athletes where we picked all athletes listed on a website of great athletes who have AA data. There's a clear criterion for what data is analyzed, and there's strict rules so the researcher cannot influence what data is being used in the test, even unconsciously. So if we have some good data like that, and we do some kind of evaluation, a quantitative evaluation, where we do what we call a t-test, for example. A t-test is a case where we can take people who have heart disease. This is a research we did recently. We took people who have heart disease, and then we made a control group. We call it a shuffled control group. We take that birth data, we mix up the date, times, and places of the people, and it makes this group of charts that looks very similar in terms of the years people are born and the dates they're born and the places, but it's all shuffled together. And then we see, do the people with heart disease have something like Sun square Uranus or some other aspect that maybe planets in Leo, because Leo rules the heart, in some kind of configuration that appears to be bad, like the ruler of the sun is square Saturn. You can make up with any rules you want, with whatever orbs you want, and we get a result that fits with theory. Now, suppose that you've just fit the existing data. In fact, this is what we did. An example of this research is the heart disease vulnerability astrosignature that my wife Faye Cochran, developed and gave a presentation on at the 2022 Vibrational Astrology Conference. What she did is she went through the database of all people that have heart disease, and she found out that they have certain planetary configurations that theoretically make sense according to vibrational astrology. So that's point C. The results fit with theory. The effect size is very good. Effect, which is the second of the 3 points I have there in evidence number 2 in this list of items here on this slide, that the effect size is very good. That means that the people who have heart disease are much more likely to have these planetary configurations. And it is an existing database that's in the Sirius software, so she did not select the charts. So A, there's no selection bias. B, the effect size is very good. And C, the results fit with theory. This gives us some evidence that these planetary configurations are really connected to heart disease. Now, why is this evidence number 2 weaker than evidence number 1? Because it's not tested with new data. We call it building a model. She built a model with existing data that works. The next step in the research would to find some new data, new people with heart disease, and test it. That would be evidence number 1. But very often, before you can get to evidence number 1, a hypothesis test, you need to do evidence number 2. So evidence number 2 is often a prerequisite, not necessarily, but usually a prerequisite to get to number 1. So very often research happens in stages, getting better and better and better. So that's number 2, is building it's very simple. You've built the model, but you have not tested it with new data. It's that simple. Last sentence in point number 2. These are models that fit the data, but have not been tested. They fit the data. In other words, when we say fit, that's a word we use a lot in research methods. It means that people with heart disease really have these planetary configurations, and the others, the control group, do not. So if you meet those 3 requirements, and it's a quantitative assessment, quantitative research means you have numbers at the end. And so we have a statistical test we do that tells us the probability that people have this in their birth charts and consequently have heart disease is very, very strong. It's very likely that if you have these planetary configurations, you will get heart disease. At least that's what the data is telling us. So that's the evidence. If we test it with new data, it goes up to hypothesis test, and we gain more confidence. But having a model that fits with data is still evidence. It's still evidence, still a suggestion that this works. And this is almost never done in astrology, in other forms of astrology, but it is done in vibrational astrology. Number 3, instead of quantitative, a qualitative assessment. So it's the same idea, and typically what happens in a qualitative assessment is it's an extreme case sampling study. So extreme case sampling studies that give qualitative results also give us some confidence that it's true. So for a good extreme case sampling study, again, there's no selection bias. We take the data that's in the Sirius software, for example, in that database, and the results are consistent and they fit, with theory. So an example of this is our research on zodiac signs. So we went through the database, we found the people who have the most planets in Aries. We see what they are like. That's qualitative. We're not attaching numbers to it, but we're seeing that all the people with a lot of Aries have a certain trait in common. And so we built the model. We have not tested it with new data. So it's the same as number 2, but it's a qualitative research with extreme case sampling. That gives us strong evidence that what we're saying about Aries, Taurus, and Gemini is really true. It's stronger evidence than all of your individual charts you've ever done. Now that may not sound fair, because maybe astrologers have done millions of charts, and somebody comes along with this research design where they go through the database and they do this extreme case sampling, and that this counts even more. Yes, according to modern research methods, it does, because it's so easy to fool ourselves, and this prevents us from fooling ourselves. And the results from extreme case sampling, they really work. So, the proof is in the tangible results. Like this extreme case sampling is used in genetics research. It's called extreme phenotype sampling. And it's used in genetics research, and they find out what the genetic markers are for certain situations. Like obesity, they found the genetic markers for obesity using extreme case sampling. They call it extreme phenotype sampling. Very successful, and it's very successful in astrology research as well. Fourth kind of research, or I'll say better than research, evidence. The fourth kind of evidence that gives us confidence is data visualization. When we see a graph, for example, of the data, and we can see that in certain planetary configurations are occurring much more often, it's clear in the graph. So a common one that we use is astrosignature graphs that show the rise and fall of tendencies. So very recently, in the past few weeks actually, I made a graph of the rise and fall of pro-American and anti-American feelings and how there's a global tendency to attack America and other countries that are aligned with American values when this graph is high. So this is another kind of evidence where we can see what's going on. So again, if there's no selection bias and the results are consistent with theory, data visualization gives us greater confidence. So someone may say, oh, well, big wars happen when Mars is square Uranus, and it happened during World War II. Okay, so maybe that was true. I just made that up just now. But what if you made a graph every time Mars is square Uranus with whatever orb you're using, and see if the graph went up high, instead of just having it in your head to physically see the graph? And then does it go up when there was World War I or any other war? What kind of wars? What kind of conditions? So being able to translate our thoughts into visualizations is a huge step forward. So those are the 4 strongest kinds of evidence. On the next slide, I'm going to show you some more. But let me take a little break here before I go on and repeat the idea here, is that in vibrational astrology, like any evidence-based practice, each astrologer does not get to decide by themselves, out of context with other astrologers, what is the best evidence and what is not. We have rules, reasonable rules, that if something is confirmed by a hypothesis test, we cannot ignore that. It's like, whoa. So it's an evidence-based system where the evidence guides us. That does not mean you're a robot and you just repeat whatever you see. It's that it makes sense. It should inspire your sensitivity. There shouldn't be a battle between the outer reality of the research and what you feel in your heart. Your observations should confirm. They should all work together. So this is just common sense. If you gather a bunch of charts and the people with fixed signs really are stubborn, my gosh, wow, it really works. So there are ways to just determine what works and what does not work. So this is how evidence-based practices work. Okay, let's go on. Number 5. Suppose you have an idea that's consistent with vibrational astrology theory, and you use it in your consultations, but this idea has not been evaluated by an extreme case sampling study or some kind of data visualization or any of the first 4 things. So an example would be that we use midheaven houses and vertex houses. This is actually the 9th video in a series of videos on evidence-based practice, but you don't have to watch the first 8 videos to watch this one. But in those earlier videos, I describe how in vibrational astrology we use something called equal houses, we use midheaven houses, we use vertex houses. And we use them because they fit with vibrational astrology theory. There are huge problems with other house systems, such as the ascendant can be conjunct the midheaven and 6 houses disappear in quadrant houses. And so it removes some of those problems and confusions. It works extremely well in our practice. So these ideas about houses, A, they're consistent with the theory, B, they work in consultations. Okay? So that's evidence we can use it. So an idea that's consistent with VA theory, and we use it in our consultations, even though we have not yet tested it through an extreme case sampling study or something else. there's still some evidence, some support. Even a little support, even a little evidence is better than no evidence. So this is how we prioritize it. Now, we have done the extreme case sampling research on the 12th house, where we looked at people with the strongest 12th house with all three house systems, equal, midheaven, and vertex. And we got, our results. We came up with ideas, and it confirmed our basic ideas, and it also refined them. Typically, when you do the research, it modifies your ideas. It sharpens them, makes them clearer. It highlights what's really important. So you find that you're on the right track, but the research helps make it all much clearer and more precise. And that's what we found in the research. But we haven't done the other 11 houses yet. It takes hundreds of hours to go through all this data, analyze it, and so on. So that hasn't been done yet. Okay, so that's an example of the fifth kind of evidence. So if you have an idea that fits with VA theory and you use it with your clients, then that's part of VA, but it's a weaker form. It's weaker support than as compared to something that's been analyzed through the data. Point number 6, an idea that arises from consultations is consistent with VA theory. It's been shared with other astrologers and found to be useful. And there hasn't been evaluated with a database yet. So points number 5 and number 6 are essentially the same. We could kind of merge number 5 and number 6 here. They're both about ideas that arise from consultations, are consistent with VA theory, and have been shared with other VA astrologers. So if you have an idea like the houses, and we have lots of VA astrologers using that idea, it's been around, then it's getting used by a lot of people. Number 7 is an idea that fits with VA theory and is in your consultations. I'm sorry. Let me say it again. Number 7, ideas that arise from consultations, astrological traditions or beliefs and experiences of astrologers, but are not yet implied by VA theory. So, for example, suppose you use reading ruling planets of zodiac signs. Ruling planets of zodiac signs, like Moon rules Cancer, Sun rules Leo, is standard astrology. It's not part of vibrational astrology yet. If we can get some evidence for it through a database analysis, we can start using it. We need at least evidence through a database or consistency with VA theory or a large group of VA astrologers using it and discussing it and publishing in some form, writing articles or videos, and circulate those ideas and get some feedback, then the evidence for it increases. But as it stands right now, the vibrational astrologers have not presented the data on how the ruling planets of zodiac signs would improve our analysis using vibrational astrology. Of course, there's lots of articles about it, but not convincing enough that it can be included within the framework of vibrational astrology. But there's evidence for it. There's evidence for ruling planets of zodiac signs. The fact that hundreds of thousands of astrologers for a long time have used it, there's some support for the idea. And number 8, the weakest one, is ideas from consultations, astrological traditions, or beliefs that contradict VA theory. Okay, ruling planet of a zodiac sign is not implied by VA theory, but it doesn't disagree with VA theory. Sabian symbols, which is an idea of how to interpret degrees, used in preference over other degree meanings that we've built from VA theory, contradicts VA theory, because we have another theory for degree meanings that is consistent and you could say even derived from VA theory, where the vibrational charts imply that each degree has a different meaning. So if you use an idea, it's simple. Suppose you use an idea that not only is not part of vibrational astrology theory, but it contradicts VA theory. It's saying, no, even though VA theory says that degree meanings arise because of these vibrations, I'm not finding those vibrations work very well. I'm finding that the Sabian symbols work better. So suppose you find that the Sabian symbols work better in your consultations than the ideas that are generated from vibrational astrology theory. It could happen. Vibrational astrology is not perfect. The theories are not perfect. If that happens, then you still have evidence. You have the evidence of your experiences. We don't throw that out. But that's the weakest evidence. The weakest evidence is something that is your personal experience or the personal experience of other people. There isn't a controlled research study or a data-driven study to support it, and it contradicts vibrational astrology theory. That's still evidence, and you can still use it in your practice. So those are the 8 levels of research. Actually, I kind of merged 5 and 6. You might call it 7 levels of evidence that we use. Now, I don't even have these levels memorized myself. You don't have to memorize them. All you need to remember is that a hypothesis test is the strongest evidence, and models built with databases done in a proper way is your next strongest evidence. And your third strongest evidence are ideas that are built from VA theory, but we haven't tested them with databases yet or some other formal research study. So those are the levels of evidence, and any evidence is okay. I mean, including number 8. If you have evidence that Sabian symbols work, even though they lie completely outside of vibrational astrology theory and even contradict it, that's still evidence. You don't throw it out. Any evidence is evidence. So in a way, vibrational astrology does not fight against other theories. We just see what level of support they have. And from the vibrational astrology perspective, that's the lowest level of support. And also, if you're using number 8, ideas that don't fit within vibrational astrology, then it's good for you to use them because you have evidence for them, but recognize that they're not VA. So number 8 is a form of evidence, but we label it as not VA because in an evidence-based practice, you want a consistent set of ideas. You can't have a hodgepodge. So we have ideas we use that are within the VA framework, and then you could have ideas that you use outside the VA framework. Now, some VA astrologers don't use any ideas outside the VA framework. For example, I don't use ruling. I don't even use ruling planets of signs, which is level number 7, and I don't use Sabian symbols, which contradict. And I haven't seen that the Sabian symbols work better than our theory of degree meanings, which is born out of vibrational astrology theory. Our theory that we use, when I look at charts and I analyze what's going on, my subjective impression is that the VA theory works better. But your subjective impression can be different. So it's a free world. You can do whatever you want. You can master VA. You can use a lot of VA. You can use things that contradict VA. It's fine. But that leads to our next point, which is this, the second paragraph on this slide. VA astrologers are free to use non-VA astrological ideas as described in evidence number 8 on the previous slide. The VA astrologer, however, should make it clear whether the ideas are part of vibrational astrology. For example, an astrologer who uses primarily ideas in vibrational astrology and also interprets the ruling planets of the signs on house cusps or uses quadrant house systems can describe themselves as a vibrational and a modern psychological astrologer. So at the top of the slide, I call it proper representation and truth in advertising. So if you're using ideas outside of vibrational astrology, that's fine. Go ahead and do it. Just acknowledge that. Make it clear. You could say, for example, also that you are an astrologer who uses modern astrological methods. You can make up your own term for what you do. This is simply to prevent confusion and to allow vibrational astrology to develop as an evidence-based practice. And so, for example, if I go to or you or anybody goes to a naturopath, and that naturopath also is a medical doctor with an MD degree, and I go to the naturopath, and the naturopath just prescribes for me these prescription drugs for the headache that I have, as well as maybe a more naturopathic remedy as well as massage, it is helpful if that naturopath advertises that they are a naturopathic as well as allopathic medical doctor, rather than advertising themselves as only a naturopath. Because if you go to a naturopath, you don't expect them to prescribe these prescription drugs. It's just not what naturopaths do. But if you're both a naturopath and what we call an allopathic medical doctor using the modern system of healing, then just tell people so they know. So if you use vibrational astrology and evolutionary astrology, or use vibrational astrology and you use Sabian symbols, that's fine. Just state what you do and understand how it relates to vibrational astrology. So we're not, in an evidence-based practice, we're not tying down people's intuition and their desire to explore things and what works for them. We just have, you might say, a proper representation and truth in advertising, truth in communication, that what is VA, what is not VA, and how you're relating to the VA system and its theoretical framework, and the hierarchy of evidence that we use in vibrational astrology. Okay, so concluding comments. When someone asks, is there scientific evidence for astrology? People are often saying, do you have any evidence of this? That's really not a very good question. It's also not a very good question in psychology or medicine. It's not really getting to the heart of what we want to know in terms of what these professions claim that they do. So what the profession of psychology and medicine and vibrational astrology claim is that they're using the best evidence. A better question is, what is the best evidence? What does the best evidence indicate regarding the validity, accuracy, and usefulness of the medicine you practice, or the psychology you practice, or the vibrational astrology that you practice? The same questions are asked of medicine, psychology, and vibrational astrology. How have you prioritized the evidence? How have you gathered the evidence? What does the evidence indicate? How can a researcher go in and look at your body of evidence and evaluate it? How are you taking the evidence from the controlled research studies and applying them with your clients? And does it continue to work? Are you finding you have to modify the ideas? You're just analyzing the whole situation from the point of view of an evidence-based practice. So an evidence-based practice has a clear, vibrational astrology is an evidence-based practice, and vibrational astrology does have a clear, elegant, and strong theoretical framework. It does have a large body of evidence. It does use research methods and data that are available to others to replicate or build upon. And right now, at this period of time, there is no other area of astrology that is currently pursuing the path of an EBP. And the book, The Astrology of Bipolar Disorder, Scientific Breakthrough, is getting positive responses. I make this video in mid to late April 2022. The book just came out very recently. It's already getting a positive response from researchers in other fields. They are suggesting, some of these researchers and psychologists and high-tech research people, that we use the term cosmobiology instead of vibrational astrology, because when we use the word astrology, it gives the wrong impression about what we're doing. and we want words that accurately describe what we're doing. So whatever you want to call it, I still call it vibrational astrology. It is an evidence-based practice, and it is, in a way, a lot more like what's done in research institutes and academia than what's normally done in astrology, because it follows the rules of an evidence-based practice. And so far, the response from the astrology community has been weaker than from non-astrologers. We'll see how things play out over the coming years and see if that changes. But vibrational astrology is moving rapidly into this other world. And it's moving into this world I've mentioned before in a previous video in this series of people that are combining mysticism and science, like Bruce Lipton and Rupert Sheldrake and Nassim Haramein and many others. It's part of that lineage and part of that path of using the rules of science or evidence-based practice. In the case of astrology, it's an evidence-based practice approach that we're using, and that's how we operate. We operate as an evidence-based practice, and that is exciting to other people who are using the same kinds of approaches to understanding things and applying them. Okay, my friends, at long last, I'm at 36 minutes and 9 videos. A lot of them stand on their own, but they also operate as a sequence of videos on evidence-based practice and science and how vibrational astrology fits into all this. So as we proceed to learn the rules of vibrational astrology, you now know this context and framework in which vibrational astrology operates. Thank you very much for listening, my friends. God bless. Namaste.